No. It's awesome. Okay. So I think to just take us along this heat and into the next bit, one of the first things I just want to direct this question to Dennis. Just a little bit of your story. So you were the national director of Christian Surfers, and then you felt called to plant a church, surf church, and just wanted to know the church is called Pura Vida, yeah, which means pure life. So the question is, just can you describe how Christian Surfers and Surf Church, the partnership would work?
Thank you. I think it just makes sense. You know, Christian Surfers, I mean, the whole idea, and one of the requisites for a chapter to exist, normally it is that that the core group to start a chapter has to be committed to a local church. But oftentimes, I mean, that's not the case. You cannot, I guess they explain sometimes that you have to have the horse before you buy the cart, right? But in some places, you kind of end up with a cart and there's no horse to pull it. So that was kind of the case for us. So we kind of went a reverse way. We didn't have the local church and then started the chapter. It kind of went like, hey, we have a chapter. Why not grow into this? And then God turned it, really breathed it into a church. But I think this is the key part. The idea of even using Christian Surfers as a platform to plant churches, the idea is not that once we plant the surf-friendly church here, we kill Christian Surfers, because that's like shooting ourselves in the foot. If you think about it, I mean, there's just like, it's almost like we can see it more as for me, I can just understand it more that the Christian Surfers is the net to fish, and the church is more like the boat. So if you catch the fish in the net and you leave it there too long, either one, they will go bad on the net. Or second, two, they will escape out of the net. Because Christian Surfers is mostly outreach. So it makes more sense to bring them into the boat. But again, the boat without the net, it's almost like, what do I fish with? So it's just that same I would say it's a symbiosis. And like when we see this bridge, it's just perfect sense. I mean, like, what a better place to train leaders than a Christian Surfer chapter. I mean, sometimes people will freak out if you say, hey, will you preach a sermon in church this Sunday? They'll be like, oh, man, I can't do that. But sometimes if you say, hey, could you lead a Bible study around the campfire for Christian Surfers? Oh, I can do that. And they don't understand that there is, really, in a way, there's no difference. It's the Word of God, but it's almost in a way to get them, confident on what God is calling on that leadership. So it's just a natural symbiosis. It just makes sense. So I don't see that. I guess that if somebody starts a church and kills the chapter, too bad for him or too bad for her. I just it just makes sense having them together.
Great. Another question I want to ask George. This is called the Surf Church Collective. Do you want to just expound a little bit on why collective? What does collective mean?
Yes, collective is a chosen word on purpose because it really says something about a network. It says something about a central conversation, and it describes that we can all get better when we're in one place together. So when Roy first called all of us, we didn't all know each other very well. I didn't know Robbie very well. I had met Rich. I didn't know Dennis at all. I didn't know Troy. I didn't know some of Matt Timms. I didn't know you guys. But as soon as this conversation was pulled together into one conversation, a collective conversation, all of a sudden, like Rich said, we started to see that Jesus had been doing the same thing in all of our hearts. We all had youth ministry backgrounds. We all had discipleship as a main thing. We all had surf and Christian Surfers connections and all of that, but we didn't know each other. So the collective is really a way of saying, let's have one conversation so that we could know, are we reaching this globe? Does every surfer? I mean, how would we know every surfer had access to a surf-friendly church if we weren't having one conversation to know what's going on? So when this conversation pulled together, collective was the perfect word to say, collected into one conversation to reach this one world for this one Jesus.
I'm going to send this one to Rich. So regular or goofy?
Actually, I've got an injury from what's just happened. I'm in considerable pain, and I actually do need to get off the stage. I've hurt myself, so I wonder if we could have an injury wild card join us on the stage. Could Troy come and take my place? While I quickly go to my wife, who's a nurse, and deal with some severe pain that's taking place through the center of my body. Does anybody know where the first aid lady is? Yes!
He's serious. Yeah, I know. Okay, well. So in the Heat recap, there was a pretty bad wipeout, and he's been taken off, and so we'll see if he gets the injury wild card. But he can walk and talk, so it should be good. Great. Well, I was think then, Robbie, I'm going to flick that one to you. So the word collective. Okay, wait. Regular, or goofy.
Regular.
Regular. So I'm going to just chuck that in there because all of these guys surf. So the collective, if I'm correct, we got 2 years ago, we started the conversation. And what we found that within Christian surfers, there was a number of church practitioners, people actually planting or running churches, who were also part of this discussion. So could you tell me, how did we pull that who's in the collective? How does the collective, when you say collective, I get the word, it pulls us all together, but who is actually in the collective?
So the collective, that word is just the big group. It's the big umbrella. So anyone who is interested in accessing or helping to be a part of the movement is the collective. It's the broad group. And so what we will be doing, because this is essentially the birth of a movement, and so this isn't underway yet, but as we grow, starting this week, we'll be collecting names and email addresses and phone numbers and websites and all that, collecting all of those who are already practicing as pastors of surfer-friendly churches or organizations that are good resources to help in training. They are Christian surfers leaders that are interested in, it's a group of people who have a need to be met. We have a chapter, or we have Christians on a beach, but we have no friendly church. All of those together, collected in one group, and then by pooling them together can maximize their efforts and their resources to empower the leaders to meet the need.
Great, thanks, man. And then Troy, over to you. So Troy, you run a surf church in Portugal. I was lucky enough to come to one of the Christian Surfers European gatherings, and I was amazed at how many surfers there are in Portugal. And the Christian Surfers vision statement is that we would know and follow Jesus. And so the question is, regular or goofy?
It depends on the wave.
Whoa, a switchfoot. A switchfoot.
I
There we
surf
go.
regular.
Good. And I think just the question, you've pioneered and planted a church in a surf culture. So just tell us a little bit about that. Was it quite a difficult thing to do in your context?
Yeah, there's been many difficulties and actually a lot of things that we found to be easier than we originally expected. I think the greatest difficulty to reach the real deep surfing community that's been surfing for a long time, the shredders. I think it's that I'm a really big kook and people are scared to follow what we're saying. They might end up surfing like I surf. So that's been a big challenge. Fortunately, my wife has a real beautiful style and people tend to want to follow her a little bit more than me. Yeah, actually one of the real challenges is that a lot of churches, a lot of religion in Portugal has been quite abusive to the people. And even still, we've been there now 4 years with the same message, with the same style, with the same genuine love and affection for everyone. And still there's this critical nature. There's this trying to understand, how is it that this group of people are trying to get our money? How is it that they're trying to manipulate us to take from us? And so that's been a very big challenge, really. But it calls us to genuine love. It calls us to consistency. It calls us to live our day to day, really filling up in the Lord and loving and pouring out. And I'll tell you, it's starting to happen. The ice is starting to melt. And the things we've been investing in for 4 years now are starting to pay. And yeah, it's been challenging, but really wonderful.
Fantastic. Dennis, back to you. Regular, goofy. I did ask you this, right?
And I was regular.
Regular.
Yeah.
Good. So the question is, in your context with Christian surfers, you were heavily involved in Christian surfers. You stepped into doing local church. But how would you see the planting happening, the actual act of planting? So if I'm in Christian surfers and I'm part of a movement of Christian surfers, what would your advice be? If I really feel I'm feeling deeply called to go and plant, what are the next steps?
I think, again, it's just one of the greatest things about this is that we cannot forget or be thankful what God used to save us and to disciple us and to bring it into this. So I just think for us, it was more like, in my particular example, it's like, since we were in Costa Rica, we didn't have a surf-friendly church. We started it in the living room of our house. Like a Christian surfers chapter, like the typical grums, couple dogs, things on the living room, same thing. And then, but once it started to develop and grew, I passed on, I was the director I was the national director of Christian surfers. So I was wearing two hats, and there's a moment that I'm wearing two hats. I'm the local pastor of a church and I'm the national director. So it started to get in that point. It was like that you can confuse people too, because sometimes people is like, is this the church? Is this Pura Vida Church? Or is it this Christian surfers? What is this? And then that's when like about, when they were saying, if you cannot change, what is it, the leader, you have to change everything else. So that's when we realized that it was time for us to pass it on. So I passed it on to Damien. That was, and one of the things is that I got to say, I say with a lot of pride on this. It was great for me to say, we're going to give our best leaders back to Christian surfers. And we did, and it's kind of like when we passed on, we gave the best leaders to Christian surfers. So I think, again, it's like an advice is don't forget where you're coming from and how useful that is. And, what it makes sense, that partnership. But at the same time, make sure that you don't choke it. Because that's the other thing. You could create a local church and almost choke Christian surfers. And people in that country, every time they hear, oh, is this Christian surfers? Oh, is that the Pura Vida Church thing? No. Christian surfers is Christian surfers. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yep. Okay, George, over to you. So you're the pastor of a church in San Clemente, Shoreline. The name is really interesting. And one of the questions is this a church just for surfers? Is the Surf Church Collective going to be just for surfers?
Well, you guys know this, that surfing has changed a lot in just the last 20 years. It was a young person's sport, and then all of us young people grew up, and we got old, and now we're old, and we're still surfing. And then I look ahead, there's guys in my church who are 60s, 70s. I mean, they've got bad ankles and, broken shoulders and whatever, and they're still finding a way to get in the water, and they're surfing with their grandchildren, and they're teaching their grandchildren as well. So one thing is that surfing has changed a lot. It's not just a youth movement anymore. It's very much a generational movement. So when you talk about reaching surfers, that's a wide range of people. But then secondly, is you guys know this too, most surfers are connected to family and friends, many of whom don't surf. Phil and Matt mentioned that while they were up here as well, that there's people in churches who have a heart for surfers who don't surf at all as well. So there's this bigger tribe that understands beach culture that you all live in. You know, Troy and those guys are reaching a beach culture. That doesn't mean they're only interested in the surfer. It means they're interested in the place that they live. Most of you guys live in a beach town. And there's a lot of people that love that beach town that don't surf, but that would be drawn to a church that's beach cultured, sandy feet friendly. But if your target is to reach surfers, you're going to reach more than surfers as well. So that's why we use the phrase surfer-friendly church. It's friendly to surfers. Surfers understand it. The pastoral ministry and the people there get the surfing culture, and they want to be intentional about reaching surfers, and that can include a lot of people even who don't surf in that kind of environment.
Thanks. Are you timing this heat? How are we doing? I just need to know when I've got 5 minutes left. Okay, 5 minutes. We're at the 5-minute mark, boys. Alrighty. So I know that there's some interesting stuff going to be happening. That conversation that started 2 years ago set up a little steering committee, and at the back end of this conference, there's something really exciting. Do you want to tell us about that, Robbie?
Yeah, a couple things. Once the conference is done, then the teams of people get together and we'll be formalizing some things. And I think the actual birthday of the Surf Church Collective is the Saturday. So that'll be actually so all of this has all been growing and forming. So then the birthday will be Saturday, and then after that on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday we have the sea salt training as well. And so once all this gives birth and launches, then we have training that begins, and then all of a sudden after that, then that's when we begin to make this real.
So when you say birthday, what do you mean? What's actually happening?
I think that means that we're actually in the birth canal right now.
Well, you could say that.
All right. So what I'm trying to get to is, and I'll tell this to George.
Yes.
Who's
on the team?
Who's going to be? What's going to happen? So from what I understand, there's a group of 19 practitioners who you guys have been in contact with via email and Skype conversations in a very sort of systematic process over the last 2 years. They're going to all be in, these are church pastors of surfer-friendly churches, and you've got some decisions to make. Is that am I kind of...
Yeah, the way I understand is what's been happening over the last 2 years, there's been like a steering team. That's so some of us up on the stage, and we've been formulating, having conversations. But on Saturday, as we get together, then there'll be an official team that emerges that's the official leadership team. So we have a leadership team, then there's a council. So we will have a council, and that is like essentially like elders who will guide the leadership team. This council will be people a part of the collective, but they're actually practitioners. They're actually current pastors, current leaders that are actually doing this. They will guide it, and there'll be a leadership team will help put the nuts and bolts together. And so all of that gets formalized not until Saturday.
Great. So I'm going to flick one question to the floor. So if you want to ask a question, you can think about it now. That might be risky, but it could be the big next move that really pushes this heat over the top. But before we do that, if someone wants to find out more information about the Surf Church network, where do they go?
Yeah, so first of all, if you just ask, you're here at the conference, we have 2 electives coming up Wednesday and Thursday, so we can gather and have lots of conversation along that lines. But at the moment, if you have web access, we have a rudimentary basic website that we have begun. It's surf.church. So the extension is .church, surf.church, and you get the basic level information there. And there's also a contact form if you want information beyond that. You can fill that out, and we can get back to you with whatever questions you have.
Right. Anyone have a question that they want to ask? I knew this moment could probably fall flat, but that's why I gave you some warning.
It's not so much a question, but an observation that history says about you know when in UK the black guys came over from the West Indies, and they were rejected by the churches, and then they formed their own churches, and then somewhere along the line they had to integrate back into the ecumenical movement, and hey, they had an amazing worship style that was sort of lost in the rest of the churches, I'm not. I'm trying to form a question around it, but I can't think of the actual question. I'm just making an observation, really.
Are we creating a reactionary denomination?
Listen,
Is that the question?
I've pastored a surf-friendly church, and I know the pressures that are under you guys, and you know, I've felt it, but I'm just trying to think, where's it going, and is it what's the long term? Because we're all part of the church, whether it's surf-friendly or not. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. You know, where is it going? That's a really good question. You know, because if we will know the response to the end of that, then it will be something that we can control. The idea of this, we're trying to formalize something, is more like a movement of movements. So in this way, it will be something more like what happened in the book of Acts. I'm pretty sure that the disciples didn't have a clue how the church was going to end up. I mean, they were actually surprised when some people said, hey, do you know that the Gentiles are believing the gospel? You know, like, what? You know, so it's kind of like that is the thing. And again, this collective of movements will also give the freedom. Like, for example, if you're Baptist, go Baptist. You know what I mean? It's obviously we're not going to, there is some essentials that we will not negotiate, but there is a lot of freedom. It's not like we're creating a denomination or we're like, you know, but we understand that there's always that thing, like when you're a teenager, you said, I will never act like my mom, you know, and then you're getting older and said, oh my goodness, I'm starting to look like my mom. So there is going to be some freedom and there is going to be some similarities. And yes, we just want to make sure that we're not creating just a denomination.
Yes.
All right. So to wrap this up, guys, thank you so much. It's been a real honor to have you on the stage. I'm excited for this. Our vision is that every surfer and every surfing community would know and follow Jesus. And I think we follow Jesus best in community, and the shape that God has given us for that is the church, in whatever shape, size, or form it happens. And from what I'm hearing here, it sounds like this is more of a network of movement, a movement of networks, or a network of movements. And so if you want to hear more, please get hold of the guys, have a chat to them. What I do know is that more surfers are going to be able to know and follow Jesus if they have access to surf-friendly churches. So thank you.
Amen.
All right, yes. I manned up, I had some prayer, and I'm here. So, Jesse, do you know what's happening next?